Welcome, night owls. The aisles are silent, the fluorescent lights flicker, and something unseen stirs among the shelves. Tonight, you'll discover the haunting secrets lurking behind the after-hours shift in a familiar place, Home Depot. Steady your nerves. Once you enter these corridors, escape may no longer be an option. Allison had never feared the darkness, but she'd also never spent her nights inside a nearly empty Home Depot. The store's colossal, deserted aisles seemed to breathe with their own rhythm. Pallets of wood, bags of cement, and neatly stacked boxes of tiles formed silent sentinels in the half-lit environment. Night shift stocking sounded straightforward when she had applied. Come in, organize inventory, leave before sunrise. It was a simple plan for earning extra money and balancing her college schedule. But on her very first shift, she sensed something was off. From midnight to 6 a.m., only a skeleton crew wandered these halls. Allison, two other stalkers named Ben and Tori, and their manager, Jackson. Jackson was a weary sort of man who never smiled. He gave them tasks, then promptly vanished into the back office. Allison was grateful for Tori's chatter because it chased away the eerie hush that settled over everything. In the earliest hours, Allison noticed an unusual pattern. While she was restocking door hinges in aisle 12, she thought she spotted a shadow at the far end, like someone peeking around the corner. When she called out, nobody responded. She shrugged it off, attributing it to a trick of the overhead lights. Still, she couldn't help feeling watched. After finishing one pallet, she moved on to aisle 14. It was a corner area where a variety of power tools lined the walls. The overhead bulbs buzzed in a hypnotic drone. She made a habit of humming quietly to calm her nerves. She was halfway through stacking cordless drills when, from the corner of her eye, she saw the same fleeting shadow slip behind a display of handsaws. Heart thudding, she pretended not to notice and inched closer, determined to prove to herself it was all in her imagination. But as she neared the display, she found a single wrench lying on the ground. A wrench that should have been on a shelf in a completely different aisle. It made no sense. Allison picked it up and placed it aside, planning to return it to the correct spot later. Her rational mind told her night shift stalkers often find misplaced items, but a quiet shiver reminded her that something about this moment felt intrusive. When her break came, Allison joined Tori in the break room. The hum of a distant HVAC system provided the only sound. Tori was scrolling aimlessly on her phone, looking uncharacteristically tense. Sensing Tori's mood, Allison asked if anything was wrong. Tori hesitated, then admitted she'd felt someone watching her in the lumber section. I caught a glimpse of, I don't even know what to call it, some shape, she explained. But there's no one else here, right? Allison nodded slowly. Their store was locked to customers after hours. The only people who could be inside were employees. Yet this presence felt different, intangible. Later that night, Allison and Tori were assigned to reorganize the lighting aisle. Rows of bulbs, lamps, and ceiling fans made the space feel cramped. Ben had taken a forklift to the garden center. He wouldn't be back for at least an hour. As they sorted packaging, Tori casually mentioned that a few months back, there had been a rumor among the older employees that the store had a resident spirit or some kind of entity. People joked about it being the ghost of a customer who wandered off into the wrong aisle. But employees whispered about strange flickers and moving shadows. Mid-sentence, Tori's words trailed into silence. She looked up at the overhead lights. One fixture started to flicker, then another. Within moments, the entire aisle went dark. They stood there, hearts pounding, surrounded by the whirring hush of the store. Allison felt her pulse throbbing in her eardrums. Then slowly, the lights buzzed back to life as if nothing had happened. Tori let out a shaky breath, forcing a nervous laugh. Yet in that brief darkness, Allison could have sworn she heard a faint scraping noise from behind the pallet of ceiling fan boxes. Neither of them wanted to check, so they pretended it was nothing and moved on to the next aisle. But the tension lingered, an unspoken agreement to ignore what they'd just experienced. As the shift dragged on, Allison found herself alone again. Tori needed to clock out early because she felt ill. Ben was still in the garden section, relabeling inventory under Jackson's supervision. Allison started scanning barcodes in the flooring department, a cavernous aisle filled with giant slabs of tile and rolls of carpet. The large overhead lights cast tall, eerie shadows on the concrete floor. She tried to work efficiently, each beep of her scanner feeling unnaturally loud in the hush. Pausing for a moment, she leaned against a stack of tile boxes. An uncomfortable prickling sensation had settled on the back of her neck. She glanced over her shoulder. At the far end of the aisle, behind a broad metal shelf, she saw movement. Someone, or something, was shifting there. She squinted, focusing on that spot. A tall silhouette emerged, featureless in the dim. It stood completely still, as if studying her in return. Allison's heart hammered. Fear rooted her to the spot. Feeling lightheaded, she forced her feet to move. She stepped toward it, scanning for a better look. The silhouette backed away, disappearing behind the shelves as though it had melted into the gloom. Racing to the shelf, Allison shone her phone's flashlight around. There was nothing, just stacked tile and a cold draft wafting through the store. The air smelled faintly of dust and something musty she couldn't place. Panic rising, she decided it was time to find Ben. She moved briskly through the aisles, whispering her coworker's name, the echoes of her own voice making her more uneasy. After several tense minutes, she found him in an aisle that displayed bathroom fixtures. He was kneeling next to an open box of faucets, his face etched with confusion. Before she could speak, he picked up a single piece of broken tile. It had a strange red smear on it that resembled dried paint. But the color was too dark, too jarring. Ben looked at Allison in alarm. Was someone hurt? Where did this come from? He asked. She shook her head, her heart rate surging. They glanced around but saw no sign of an accident or injury. No one else was there. Ben asked if Tori or Jackson had seen anything, but Allison explained Tori had gone home and Jackson was nowhere to be found. Something about the presence of that tile filled her with dread, as if it was a silent warning. They both stood there, unsure what to do next. Then they heard a clang from several aisles over, like metal crashing onto the floor. It echoed through the vast store, amplifying the dread in their chests. They abandoned the tile and rushed toward the noise. Rounding the corner, they saw an entire display of pipes strewn across the floor, rolling aimlessly. Standing among them was Jackson, his posture rigid, as though he'd been startled. Upon seeing them, he forced an uneasy laugh, claiming the stack had just collapsed when he tried to move it. Ben and Allison exchanged a glance. The explanation felt hollow, but neither pressed him. Jackson's gaze flickered, almost as if he knew more than he was telling. In an abrupt change of subject, he muttered something about finishing the shift strong before swiftly walking away. For the remaining hours, Allison and Ben stuck together, determined not to wander off alone. Each time they passed through an aisle, Allison felt the same sensation of being watched, a creeping chill that moved with them. No further mishaps occurred, and by the time dawn broke, they both longed for the release of stepping outside under a brightening sky. As they clocked out, Allison noticed Jackson leaning against a wall, staring at a distant point beyond the garden center's glass doors. His expression was vacant. She wondered if he too was haunted by the shadows that lingered in the aisles, the ones no one could fully explain. The automatic doors hissed open, letting in the early morning light. Allison and Ben departed, leaving behind a store where normalcy returned with the daylight. Yet Allison couldn't shake the sense that what she experienced was only an introduction to deeper secrets. The next time she worked a night shift, she would be more vigilant, more prepared. But some part of her questioned if vigilance truly mattered against an unseen presence that seemed born of the very walls. She locked her car door with trembling hands, determined never to let her guard down again in those silent, suffocating aisles. Greg had worked the Home Depot night shift for a full year before anything strange happened. In fact, he'd found the job soothing. A steady routine stocking shelves, scanning barcodes, and organizing merchandise without the chaos of daytime shoppers. But a single evening changed all that, unraveling his sense of comfort in a place he once considered a second home. It began as a typical shift. Greg loaded a pallet jack with mulch and gardening supplies. He hummed absent-mindedly as he maneuvered past aisles filled with paint cans and power tools. His manager, Carly, was stationed near the checkout counters, reviewing inventory spreadsheets. Two new hires, Marcus and Ray, trailed behind him, still learning the store layout. Around 1 a.m., Greg ventured into the far corner of the store known for its seasonal displays. The overhead lighting there was dimmer, and the space echoed with the hum of ventilation. He paused to restock a shelf of clearance Halloween decorations, pumpkins and fake tombstones left unsold even though it was well past the season. As he lifted a faux gravestone, he heard a faint rustling noise behind the large cardboard stand. He dismissed it as a stray plastic wrapper. But then, in the stillness, he heard a soft whisper. At first, he thought it was Marcus or Ray playing a prank. When he turned, no one was there. A persistent chill ran down his arms, as though the store's cold air had targeted him directly. Pushing the moment aside, he returned to his task. An hour later, Greg found himself in the plumbing aisle, a tight space with massive shelves crammed with pipes, fittings, and boxes of heavy components. He systematically loaded items onto a rolling ladder for better reach. The silence of the store felt heavier than usual, pressing on his ears. He started hearing subtle, disjointed words in the hush, like a voice trying to form sentences just on the edge of hearing. He paused, straining to listen. The words remained indistinct, but the tone seemed urgent, almost pleading. Another wave of cold dread washed over him. He hastened to finish his work. When he climbed down, he realized he was alone in that section. Marcus and Ray were refilling nails and screws in hardware. Setting down his scanner, he decided to find them, needing the comfort of human presence. But as he left the aisle, the fluorescent bulbs flickered. The fleeting darkness lasted no more than a second, but in that moment, he glimpsed a silhouette standing at the aisle's intersection. By the time the light stabilized, it vanished. Greg's heart pounded. He hurried his steps, fighting the urge to call out. Greg located Marcus and Ray in the hardware aisle, sorting washers. They had headphones in, an allowance sometimes granted on quiet nights. Neither had seen anything unusual. Greg hesitated to share what he'd experienced, unsure if it was merely fatigue or an overactive imagination. Instead, he simply asked to work near them for a bit. Carly later tasked Greg with scanning inventory in the wood-cutting area near the back of the store. This section had a saw station and heavy machines used for custom cuts. Normally, Greg enjoyed the tangy smell of lumber and found it comforting to be around tall stacks of wood. But tonight, something felt off. He noticed footprints in the sawdust, footprints that seemed too large and oddly shaped to be from a standard work boot. They led around the corner, ending abruptly at a dead end by the loading dock. There was nowhere else to go, no sign that anyone had actually left the area. The footprints simply stopped. A wave of unease gripped him. Greg couldn't decide whether to report this. The store's cameras had blind spots, so it might not capture everything. He decided at least to mention it to Carly. As he approached the front, he found Carly rummaging through a filing cabinet in the manager's nook. He described the footprints, feeling silly for sounding alarmed. She gave him a skeptical look, but agreed to accompany him to the wood-cutting area. When they arrived, the footprints were gone, as though someone had swept over them. Only smooth sawdust remained. Carly frowned, her demeanor turning from doubtful to concerned. She assured Greg they'd review the security footage, but told him to focus on finishing his tasks. After she left, Greg lingered, scanning the area for any sign of tampering. Then, from somewhere behind a stack of plywood sheets, he heard that whisper again. This time, it sounded like it was calling his name. Greg's knees felt weak. He forced himself to approach the stack. Peering around the corner, he found nothing but neatly arranged boards. Yet the air there seemed colder, heavier. He slowly backed away, uncertain whether fear had started conjuring illusions. Time dragged as the shift wore on. Greg joined Marcus and Ray again, trying to distract himself by making small talk. They noticed his jittery demeanor and teased him. Ray joked that the old ghosts of Black Friday shoppers might be haunting the aisles. Greg forced a laugh, but his anxiety wouldn't subside. Around 4 a.m., a crash echoed from the back corner of the store. Carly, Greg, and the others rushed to investigate. They discovered a toppled display of bagged soil. The heavy bags had burst open, spewing dirt across the floor. No footprints, no sign of who or what might have caused it. Carly insisted it must have been poorly stacked, but Greg saw how stable those pallets had been just hours before. As they cleaned the mess, Greg felt an unshakable sense of being watched. He looked up toward the overhead rafters. Nothing. But the impression lingered like a second presence, observing every movement. By the final hour of the shift, Greg was both exhausted and on edge. He busied himself in an aisle near the store's exit, determined to stay where the sunlight would soon creep in. That was when he noticed movement in the reflection of a glass door. A shape hovered behind him, tall, indistinct, but undeniably human-like. He whirled around. The aisle was empty. The reflection was gone. He stood there, heart thudding, aware that his rational explanations were wearing thin. Then, in one last unnerving moment, the overhead speaker crackled to life without warning. A hollow, static-filled sound filled the store. No announcement played, and no employee was near the intercom station. The speaker fell silent again, just as abruptly. When the shift finally ended at 6 a.m., Greg stepped outside. The early dawn light felt like a rescue. Marcus and Ray teased him one last time about seeing things, but both admitted they'd heard the unexplained static. Carly avoided eye contact, offering only a curt nod before heading to her car. Greg realized he wasn't alone in experiencing unease, though no one wanted to dwell on it. He drove home, replaying the night's events in his mind. The whispers, the footprints, the eerie silhouette in the reflection, they felt too real to be dismissed. He wondered if the store's quiet emptiness at night allowed something else to move freely, a presence that thrived on silence and darkness. Although he returned to the same routine the next night, his previous sense of comfort never fully came back. Each shift became a game of keeping the lights bright and the headphones at the ready, anything to drown out the possibility of hearing that voice call his name again from some hidden corner of the store. Maria had been a night shift stalker at Home Depot for nearly 2 months when she first heard about the lumber aisle ghost. At least, that was how her coworker, Frank, jokingly described it. He claimed that employees sometimes found footprints or strange markings along the stacks of 2x4s, especially after closing. She dismissed it as typical workplace lore, a way to spice up an otherwise monotonous shift. She came prepared for her usual routine: scanning in new shipments, breaking down boxes, and reorganizing shelves. On that night, the shipments were particularly heavy in the lumber section. Maria made multiple trips back and forth, carefully stacking boards while checking them off on her handheld device. Around midnight, she caught a glimpse of something odd. Small nicks on the wooden boards that looked almost like claw marks. She brushed them off as the result of a rough milling process. But as she walked further down the aisle, she noticed the marks becoming more deliberate, forming patterns that twisted into strange symbols. The sight sent a chill through her. She knelt to get a closer look, and an uneasy feeling settled in her stomach. The wooden surface felt colder than it should have, as though some hidden frost lingered on it. Just as she was about to snap a photo with her phone, she heard a muffled thud from the next aisle over. Startled, she went to investigate. A line of paint cans lay toppled, a rolling wave of color seeping from the partially opened lids. No one was around to have caused such a mess. The store was locked up. Her coworkers were scattered across the aisles, but none were near the paint section at that time. Maria reluctantly reported the spill over her walkie-talkie, feeling foolish for not having an explanation. Frank and a new hire named Zoe helped clean up. They joked around, but Maria noticed Zoe glancing over her shoulder frequently, as though expecting someone to appear. When they finished, Maria asked if Zoe felt uneasy. Zoe nodded. She confided that she had heard someone calling her name in the corridor by the bathrooms. "But nobody was there," Zoe whispered. "It's like the voice was right beside me." Maria tried to offer reassurance, but she felt her own stomach tighten with dread. Wanting to move past her discomfort, Maria returned to the lumber aisle to pick up her earlier task. This time she found the odd markings on the boards had multiplied. They snaked across the wood in lines that seemed almost purposeful. She crouched down, perplexed and apprehensive. In that moment of stillness, the overhead lights flickered. The store fell into brief darkness, and she felt rather than saw a shadow move along the shelf. The lights blinked back on, and the aisle looked normal again, except the sense of a presence remained. Determined to keep working, Maria resumed unloading fresh stock from a pallet. She was about to place a bundle of boards on a higher shelf when she noticed a single plank with deep gouges, as if someone had dug sharp nails into it. She tried to remain calm, reminding herself that wood sometimes had natural knots or splits. Yet these gouges looked anything but natural. Suddenly, the store-wide PA crackled, making her jump. She braced for an announcement but got only static, a burst of faint noise, then silence. Maria took a deep breath, telling herself that technical glitches happened all the time. She continued stalking, working faster than usual. In her haste, she reached for a large board. A corner of the wood snagged against her glove, yanking her hand. Off balance, she staggered backward. The board clattered to the ground. She winced at the sound reverberating through the quiet aisle. Before she could pick it up, she noticed something beneath the shelf. Strands of a torn apron. It was the standard Home Depot orange, frayed at the ends. Her heart seized. All employees kept their aprons in decent condition. A torn one would have been replaced. Who had left this piece? She crouched to retrieve it and felt a cold draft waft across her face. The forklift path was on the other side of the aisle, so there should be no breeze. A wave of unease rushed over her, and she scrambled back to her feet, apron scrap clutched in her hand. By this point, she decided it was time to find Frank. He was in the electrical aisle, busy reorganizing wiring kits. She showed him the torn apron piece and told him about the markings on the wood. At first, Frank tried to brush it off as a weird coincidence, but when Maria led him to the spot where the boards were stacked, they discovered half of the bizarre patterns had vanished. Only faint traces remained, like someone had sanded or scrubbed them away. Frank exhaled loudly and admitted that, years ago, there'd been an accident in the store after hours. An overnight associate had gone missing, leaving only a torn piece of apron behind. Officially, it was said the person simply quit and walked off the job, but rumors persisted. While they puzzled over the disappearing marks, Zoe rushed up, pale and trembling. She said she had been in receiving near the back entrance when she spotted a figure wearing an old, tattered apron. She called out, but the figure backed into the shadows. Zoe followed, but found only empty aisles. Maria showed Zoe the torn apron piece. Zoe confirmed it matched the ragged garment she had glimpsed. Sensing rising panic, Frank suggested they all return to the front of the store together and wait for the shift to end. They stuck close, triple-checking corners as they walked. The usual night shift hush felt suffocating now. Every squeak of a cart or rattle of a shelf made them jump. The final hours crawled. At one point, the overhead lights dimmed once more. In that momentary flicker, Maria saw the silhouette again, tall, elongated, and definitely wearing an orange apron, though it hung in tatters. She gripped Frank's arm, certain he saw it too. The lights steadied, revealing the aisle empty. The three exchanged worried looks but said nothing. Unspoken agreement bound them. They wanted to finish their shift without stoking their own terror. When the sun began to rise, they clocked out, the tension deflating in the presence of daylight. The next day, Maria quietly asked a longtime employee about any missing associates. The older coworker confirmed the story. Decades ago, an employee vanished without a trace, leaving only a shredded apron. Some believed they were trapped in the store, forced to wander the aisles at night. Others claimed it was an unrelated tragedy. But the older coworker ended with a grim note. The store is big, with plenty of hidden corners. Not everything that happens in here makes it to daylight. Maria never viewed her workplace the same way again. Each shift that followed, she half expected to hear that static on the speakers or see the scrawled patterns on the wooden boards. She took comfort in small routines, double-checking the forklift, chatting with coworkers, and keeping her phone close. Yet in the quiet moments, she felt watched. She often wondered if the wandering figure wanted to be found, or if it simply roamed these aisles forever, seeking something lost in the cavernous spaces that no one else could understand. The doors open and daylight reclaims the aisles, yet the lingering presence remains. What have you seen in the shadows of after-hours work? Beware the unseen watchers, for the night shift transforms the familiar into a realm of hidden dreads. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your courage close.